Welcome back to Sage Connections. Today, we're diving into a fascinating conversation that bridges the worlds of chiropractic care, gut health, and nervous system regulation. I'm joined by Dr. Kyle Wallner, founder of Michigan Family Wellness, who specializes in helping individuals and families restore balance through holistic chiropractic care. Together, we'll explore how the spine and nervous system influence the gut, why Akkermansia, a little known but powerful microbe, plays such an important role in metabolic health, and how supporting vagal tone can improve digestion, mood, and overall vitality. Whether you've experienced chiropractic care before or are just curious about how alignment affects the rest of your body, this episode will help you see the connection between your spine, your brain, and your gut in an entirely new light. Enjoy. Many people think of chiropractic care mainly as a way to relieve back or neck pain. Can you start by explaining how chiropractic adjustments actually influence the nervous system and why that matters for a whole body approach, a whole body health, including the gut?
Absolutely. And again, thank you so much for having me on your podcast today. I really appreciate the opportunity to just share my passion and share what I love helping people with through chiropractic care and functional medicine. So, yeah, to answer your question, have you ever laughed so hard that you cried? I think
Yep.
some people have, most people have, I would say. So when you experience that, basically euphoria, there's a release of endorphins, those neurotransmitters, those feel-good chemicals at the cellular level, which are extremely powerful at dampening stress. They also help to regulate emotion and influence inflammatory control within the body. So as you've probably heard of, endorphins, when you laugh so hard you cry, you release those endorphins from your body naturally. That is a very key player in an analogy that I have for why chiropractic adjustments are so helpful. So let me explain that now. When the chiropractic adjustment is delivered or rendered, there is a release of a neurotransmitter called GABA, okay, which stands for gamma aminobutyric acid. Now, GABA is chemically similar to endorphins, specifically in its function. So if you can see my spine model here, I actually have the part of the spine where the GABA is released from. That's called the dorsal root ganglion for people who really want to know. But when you receive that good adjustment, now again, I want to specify this does not happen for a sloppy adjustment or a half-hearted adjustment, if you will. It has to be a good adjustment with good facet motion, and there's often a cavitation of the joint along with that. But when you get that good adjustment, then you get that release of the GABA neurotransmitter. And then that is what is so helpful to your body, to your brain, to your nervous system, and helps you heal naturally. Does that kind of fit together there for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And so, one of the lesser known, when we're talking about the gut, so I kind of want to segue into that. So, one of the lesser known gut bacteria that's getting a lot of attention lately is Akkermansia. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that all right. So
Yes.
for listeners who aren't familiar, what is it? Why is it considered such a key player in the gut health and in metabolism right now?
Sure. So Akkermansia, and again, one of my passions is also helping people with their back pain, neck pain, of course, that's our bread and butter. But then also, are you sleeping? Are you digesting your food? And are you moving your bowels? And so that's where we kind of go from chiropractic care, more of the musculoskeletal, into the GI and into the functioning of the body, specifically the parasympathetic nervous system, which I know we'll talk more about later. But as you mentioned, Akkermansia is a gut microbe that lives in your colon. Okay, so we have all these gut microbes that live in our colon. We actually have more gut microbes that are quote unquote not us than we have neuronal tissue and neuronal cells that would be like are actually us, which is kind of a strange thing to think about. Kind of begs the question, who's controlling who? However, Akkermansia, again, nothing new. We've always had it. It's been around for a long time. But we are noticing that we have in modernity, we have lesser and smaller amounts of it amongst people that have these inflammatory gut conditions, inflammatory bowel conditions, even autoimmune conditions. All right. So let's first talk about the microbiome in the context of the brain. So you have your brain, which is, not down in your tummy, but it's way up in your head. And then you have your gut, which is, of course, your tummy. But you synthesize so many neurotransmitters in your gut that it's often called the second brain. So that's why when you say like, oh, I have this gut feeling about this decision I have to make or this circumstance that I'm in, that is a very real thing. Like that is a very real phenomenon to have those gut feelings, if you will. Let's talk about one key point here, which relates to aerobic bacteria and anaerobic bacteria. All right. So you've probably heard of probiotics, like, oh, take probiotics for your gut health. That they're so healthy for you and they can really help with just your overall approach to health and wellness. Yeah. So, or even like fermented foods like Greek yogurt, sauerkraut, things
Yeah.
like that. Kimchi. Right. Exactly. Kefir. Those are all fantastic. Here's the thing. For the past, like within our lifetime, for the past 30, 40 years, there has not been much change in the probiotic market over the past 30, 40 years. Like most of the gut microbes on the shelf or, online, wherever you look, there are going to be some variation on a theme between lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, and then, of course, Saccharomyces boulardii, which is the beneficial yeast bacteria. So it really comes down to variations on a theme of those three things. The thing about those bacteria, Luba, is that those are all aerobic bacteria. They grow in the presence of oxygen, which means from a manufacturing standpoint, they are relatively easy and cheap to grow and produce. All right. So if we're tracking so far, most things are aerobic. When it comes to Akkermansia, Akkermansia is a strict anaerobe, meaning that one molecule of oxygen will completely kill the entire colony of Akkermansia. So, again, from a manufacturing standpoint, that makes it very difficult for anyone, really, even a lab, to grow Akkermansia. In fact, they often call it the diva because it's so hard to grow, which I find hilarious. But again, because it's anaerobic, you have to pump the environment of which it grows with with nitrogen, so that you push out all the oxygen because it can't grow in the presence of oxygen. If you follow the probiotic market at all, if you're somewhat aware, there was an Akkermansia product that came out a couple of years ago. However, it was pasteurized Akkermansia. And so on the one hand, okay, cool, it's Akkermansia. But if you know anything about pasteurization, that means it's been heated and it's effectively in a dead or inactive state. So it's not actually doing anything once it's been pasteurized. So again, pros and cons. On the one hand, pasteurized Akkermansia can be used to help feed the good gut microbes that you currently have. So in that way, it acts as a postbiotic. But on the other hand, if you have low Akkermansia levels to begin with, taking pasteurized Akkermansia is not going to actually raise your levels of Akkermansia, if we're tracking there. So that's why it's so important. That's one of the reasons why it's so important to make sure, if you're taking Akkermansia, you want to make sure you're taking live Akkermansia. You're taking the real thing. I also want to mention where Akkermansia comes from, and this is something I find fascinating too. So Akkermansia comes from the birth canal, like from being born. So you get your Akkermansia from your mom. Okay, so whether you're natural birth or, coming down the birth canal, vaginal birth, or if you've been seeded, how women do the seeding on their babies, that's where you get Akkermansia from. You can also get it from nursing and from breast milk. Mm-hmm. However, we have a rising occurrence of babies who are born who were delivered via cesarean section and who have been formula fed, from day one for, multiple reasons. And I'm not, trying to say one way or another. I'm just saying this is the reality of the situation. And we tend to notice that babies or children who have not come down the birth canal and they weren't nursed, they tend to have much lower levels of Akkermansia. And then by extension, they often have other health complications, whether it be a cognitive thing or a gut thing or you name it. They tend to have other health complications as a result of that lower Akkermansia level. The good news here, Luba, is that we can clinically test, we can do a stool test and measure the levels of Akkermansia to tell someone whether or not they have good levels of Akkermansia or too high or too low. So we have that power now. We have that capability to measure someone's Akkermansia levels via a stool test, which I think is just amazing. And it's something I do routinely here with patients at the office, and it's just so helpful. Okay, so Akkermansia, there's four main things that Akkermansia helps you with. It helps to repair your gut barrier integrity by stimulating butyrate, which is a short chain fatty acid, and it strengthens the mucin layer. Okay, let me see if I can actually get a visual up here for us because this is very helpful. If you can see this here, Luba, these are some of the things I want people to really visualize here and make sure they sink in. The second thing it does is it improves the immune system and it increases your energy levels. So when you have a healthy gut, you have more energy, all right? Third thing it does is it helps to have better blood glucose control. So they've actually shown that it helps to lower hemoglobin A1C levels. So all your diabetic patients, all your people that have type 2 diabetes and insulin sensitivity. And it helps you lose weight by endogenously secreting, which means you produce your own, you make your own GLP-1 production, which I know you know has been very big in the news these days. Yes. And very big in the markets these days, okay? So let's talk more about that GLP-1 release. So Akkermansia helps, there's basically three ways that Akkermansia helps you make your own GLP-1. All right, so Akkermansia helps stimulate the production of propionate, which is then converted into butyrate. Butyrate is the signal for the L cells to release GLP-1, okay? And then that goes into circulation. Akkermansia also secretes P9. P9 binds to a receptor on the L cells, and guess what? Releases GLP-1. Fantastic. So there's two. There's a third thing that I want to tell you guys about, and that's the surface protein on Akkermansia called ANUC 100. And it can also stimulate, you guessed it, the release of GLP-1. So if you want to avoid taking things like semaglutide and Ozempic, which I know are very popular these days, then you can actually improve your own body's production of GLP-1 by taking a probiotic, which to me is fascinating. And again, that GLP-1, what's the purpose of the GLP-1? GLP-1 works in concert with leptin. Leptin is the satiety hormone. Ghrelin is the hunger hormone. GLP-1 works in concert with leptin to tell your brain that you are full so you don't overeat, so that you're satisfied, so that you don't eat more food than you need to. Okay, so that's where Akkermansia can really help with weight management, with losing weight, and you're getting a natural amount of GLP-1 in your system. Whereas if you inject Ozempic or semaglutide, you're getting a major, major dose of GLP-1 and that exogenous hormone into your body, which it's not that I'm against it in the short term, but again, long-term effects of heavy exogenous hormones are just not good. I don't think we have the data to show how that's very healthy for us on a fundamental level. And of course, pairing all of this with your healthy lifestyle, with their chiropractic adjustments, with eating healthy food, lifting weights, jump training for women. I'm sure you've heard about jump training for women and their bone density. And of course, getting plenty of rest. So those are some major things I wanted to tell you more about Akkermansia. Finally, Luba, if I have one more second, I wanted to share this super cool study, and I'm going to try and be as brief as possible. But here we have two women on the left, okay? We have an obese woman on the top left. They took her microbiome and they put it into a thin mouse. And then that thin mouse became obese if you kind of just follow from left to right. All right. Then, if you look at the woman on the bottom left, they took a thin woman, they took her microbiome, and they put it into an obese mouse. All right, we tracking? And then that obese mouse became thin, which is super cool. Now, that same thin mouse, they took the microbiome from that thin mouse, put it into the obese mouse from the obese woman, and then that obese mouse became thin, which to me is amazing. Last thing about this study was these two women are twins, genetic twins. They have the same genetics. So genetics has no part to this at all. It's all about the microbiome. The microbiome controls your metabolism and so much about your health.
Fantastic. Do you know how young you can start kind of supplementing that? Like the child that's born,
Mm-hmm.
via C-section and is getting formula for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Is there a way to somehow present, introduce that into their system for, I'm assuming for, improved immune function and gut
Right.
function and all that?
Right. Yeah. Great question. So currently, the Akkermansia, the live Akkermansia that we have, is in a capsule form. And you could conceivably break open the capsule and put the powder, put those ingredients, on the baby's bottle, if you will, that they use to actually, drink from, or just right on the mother's chest and have the baby, receive that way. If that is not a conducive option, or if the patient just doesn't want to utilize a product, then obviously just human milk would be the next best way to deliver those Akkermansia cultures, because you do have delivery via human milk of Akkermansia via that pathway.
So if it can't be around oxygen, how is it in
Right.
capsule form?
Yeah. So they freeze it. So they freeze dry it and they encapsulate it. And then that's how they get around the whole oxygen thing with delivery. But they do recommend refrigerating it. Once you get it in your home, they do highly recommend putting it in the refrigerator for viability and to keep everything as, cold as possible.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So, how does the nervous system and chiropractic adjustments impact the gut microbiome and the way your body communicates with beneficial bacteria like Akkermansia?
Yes. Several ways. And I think we'll talk more about the vagus nerve and vagal tone here
Hmm.
in a moment. But that's really where it comes down to, because your vagus nerve, which is cranial nerve 10, is responsible for your entire parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, that's your rest and digest part of your CNS. All right, and then on the other end, your sympathetic would be your fight or flight part of your central nervous system. Okay, and so the problem is, as a modern society, we are significantly swayed to the sympathetic side, and we need to continually find ways to get back to the parasympathetic. And one of the best ways to do this is through chiropractic adjustments. The relief you feel after a good neck adjustment, or even a good lower back adjustment, that rush of GABA into your spinal cord, there is absolutely nothing like it. Okay. And that helps you get back into a parasympathetic state. And I tell patients all the time, thank God for drugs and surgery, for emergency medicine. We need that. But there is nothing like a good chiropractic adjustment. And I tell patients, drugs and surgery can't do what a good chiropractic adjustment can do. And chiropractic can't do what drugs and surgery can do, what emergency medicine can do. So there's definitely a place for both, and each have their place. But like I was saying earlier, your gut makes all of your neurotransmitters, okay? All of your, not all of it, but most of it, your serotonin, your dopamine, your epinephrine, norepinephrine, and those can travel up and down your vagus nerve via afferent and efferent pathways, okay? So adjustments, spinal adjustments, help to improve those neural network pathways of communication. It's almost like, everyone has their cell phone, right? If you're too far away from the tower, then you're not going to have a good signal. But the closer you get to the tower with the less obstructions you have, if you're not in a cement block building, then you're going to have a better signal. Same idea with chiropractic. Your brain is going to communicate better with your body via your spinal cord if you don't have any restrictions or obstructions in that spinal vertebral column. And something I also say to patients is it's like the roads that we drive all the time to get from point A to point B or one place to another. Eventually, those roads need to be repaired. They have to replace and fill potholes. There's weather damage. There's, accidents from other vehicles, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same idea with adjustments. You need to have good lines of communication between your brain and your body in order for your body to function well.
Okay. Well, since we're on the vagus nerve, which was one of
Yes.
my favorite nerves to learn about because, the story of is, it's called the vagus nerve because it's the wandering nerve, right? It
Yes.
comes from the Latin word, the wanderer, vagabond comes from this word as well. So, yeah, it kind of goes all over the place and connects, a lot of different organs and systems. So speaking of the vagus nerve, how does it actually play a role in the gut brain connection? And for those doesn't that don't know, how does it function and why is it so important for digestion, relaxation, healing? I mean,
Yeah.
you kind of touched on a lot of this, but there,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I can elaborate. So again, your vagus nerve is going to come out of your head. It's going to come out of the base of it's part of it comes out in the midbrain section. So, above your spine, but below your skull, basically. And so it's going to come down, it's going to innervate all of your organs of digestion, including your heart and lungs. Like your vagus nerve, excuse me, is actually responsible for regulating your heart rhythm. So your SA note of your heart. And so, if you can imagine, when this one nerve is not functioning properly, or to use the shop talk, has poor tone or decreased tone, then all sorts of dysfunction can happen in the body. And so, that's again, chiropractic adjustments really help increase and maintain good vagal tone. Now, there are some other cool things you can do, which I'll get to in a second, but decreased vagal tone can impact literally every organ of your gut because, like I was saying, that wandering nerve, that nerve that goes everywhere, that vagus nerve innervates your liver, your spleen, your colon, your small intestine, your stomach, your pancreas, everything, your gallbladder, even the uterus, ovaries, and like I said earlier, your heart and everything. So a lot of people will complain of constipation or inflammatory bowel conditions. I see leaky gut syndrome all the time, intestinal permeability, gut dysbiosis, decreased microbial diversity. So, again, back to your gut microbiome, you want to make sure that we have a good, diverse microbiome in the gut. Yeah, stomach ulcers, bloating, SIBO, the list just goes on and on. Um, and like I was saying earlier, um, your Akkermansia levels play a major part in this because if you have Akkermansia levels that are too low, you're probably going to have some of these conditions. If you have Akkermansia levels that are too high, I was just looking at a study recently showing how Akkermansia levels that are too high are being linked to autoimmune conditions like MS, so multiple sclerosis. And the theory is that there is some compensatory mechanism that's happening within the body to elevate the strain levels, which makes them combative and harmful in the same way your immune system will attack the myelin sheath of the nerve in MS. Akkermansia, if you have too much of it, can do that same thing. And so, like I said, there's a lot with this. One of the things that I often tell patients to do if they're having a lot of these symptoms, let's just take constipation as one of the most common, is to do what are called vagus nerve exercises. So in the same way you can exercise your skeletal muscles, you can lift weights, you can exercise, you can train your muscles via your brain nerve muscle connection. you can also exercise your vagus nerve. And the great part about this is that it's free, like it doesn't cost anything. However, it does require a little bit of effort and consistency over time in order to raise your vagal tone. For example, one of the vagus nerve exercises is to gargle with a glass of water. So if you fill a glass of water, 6 ounces, 8 ounces, and you take a sip, just a mouthful, and I tell people to gargle that glass of water aggressively. That is analogous to like going for a run, like for your cardiovascular system, for your body. So you're aerobically exercising your vagus nerve that way. Another way to exercise the vagus nerve here, Luba, is to initiate your own gag reflex. And so that's like, doing push-ups for the vagus nerve there. So more of a strength-based thing in terms of vagus nerve exercises. So those two ways alone, if I can get patients to do those two things along with their chiropractic adjustments and then along with all the other lifestyle things we talk about, that alone will do wonders for improving vagal tone.
Interesting. How do you feel about
Yeah.
singing? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, singing, absolutely. Humming, singing, there's all these things people can do to improve their vagal tone. And yeah, singing is definitely one of those. If you're singing in the shower, sing with the radio when you're driving around the road, all those things are fantastic.
Yeah. Something I talk about all the time with all my guests, I feel like, is stress and how stress can affect so many things from a musculoskeletal perspective to, sort of the emotional uh, sort of body and how you feel about the world in general. So it has such a profound effect, right, on everything, especially on the gut. So, how does chronic stress, from your perspective, or being stuck in that fight or flight mode, disrupt that gut-brain connection? And how can chiropractic care specifically regulate that stress response?
Sure, sure. So this is, like you said, a big topic. So I tell people all the time, I cannot take your stress away. However, I can help you become more resilient to your stress or to buffer your stress better. We tracking?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll even talk with people about they're coming in for their low back pain and they're doing everything I tell them to do. They're coming in as recommended. They're doing all their at-home exercises. They're doing everything right, but they still have persistent low back pain. Job dissatisfaction or work stress or even relational stress, like these are the number one causes of low back pain. So all that to say, your spine could be fine. Like there's nothing wrong with your back, but you have this chronic stressor, this chronic afferent nociception that is just constantly hitting your system. And like I said, your back's not the problem, but it's just that constant exposure to that stress. And so sometimes I'll hear about a patient, they get a new job or they quit their job, and then magically their back pain goes away. It's really remarkable to see that. But on a more clinical level, to answer your question, the HPA axis or the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is really the governor of the stress response. So your brain perceives a stressor, which signals your adrenals, which then secretes cortisol, which is the stress hormone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So cortisol, think of cortisol as like a trump card. Cortisol wins every time, everywhere, you name it. All right. Now, small amounts of cortisol, not that bad. But large amounts of cortisol, even small amounts over time, over a long period of time, that's a problem because that will cause your body or your tissues to basically disintegrate from the inside out. All right. If your listeners like extra resources, the book Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Robert Sapolsky is fantastic in describing this stress HPA response here. Hans Selye's stress response. But again, repeated stressors over time will result in the increased risk of disease, even autoimmune disease. And it's not that this is all bad. Like I was saying earlier, like we're supposed to have a stress response. But again, that fight or flight, that's supposed to be a very short period of time while you're fighting something off or while you're trying to flee a very stressful situation. We are not designed as humans for chronic, long term, decade after decade stressful situations that are just unrelenting. Okay. Um, I tell people that chiropractic adjustments are not a panacea, right? They're not a silver bullet. Okay. Someone needs to combine their adjustments with a healthy lifestyle. You know, I, I am not afraid to tell someone, hey, you're doing everything I'm asking you to do, but because you have this one thing over here, like this is the uphill battle. And until we can address that, your progress or your results, the reason why you're coming to see me will be limited because we have this major, major stressor, this major uphill battle over here that, like I said, I can't take that away. I can help them become more resilient to it. But again, even with that, there are limitations. So one thing I'm always asking patients, Luba, I'm asking them, are they sleeping well? Are they digesting their food? And are they pooping? Because those are the three things that your parasympathetic does. And you will not do those three things if you are stressed, if you are in a sympathetic state. And so that's how often the conversation goes from, hey, doc, my back or my neck, or I'm having headaches, we fix that. But then it's like, oh my gosh, like I can't sleep. Or, oh my gosh, I haven't pooped in weeks. Or whenever I have this food, I get so bloated. Or whatever it is. That's how we go from the chiropractic skeletal structural to more of the GI, more of the functional medicine, and really helping that person on a foundational level.
I think that's a great point, and I
Yeah.
don't think it's talked about enough. There's physical therapy is kind of moving towards this biopsychosocial model of treatment. And the best way that I heard somebody describe this is, you know, when you're having, like, let's say low back pain, right?
Hmm.
It's, and if you just try to attack it from just a musculoskeletal component, or assuming especially if it's chronic, and you're not asking somebody if they're having stress in their life from other areas. It's literally like you have an overflowing sink and the faucet is on and it's plugged up, and all you're doing is mopping up the floor. You're mopping up the water from the floor. When the reality is, if you turn off the water and take out the plug and the water drains, the water on the floor will dry up eventually. So kind of to your point, when you said, somebody got a promotion, they changed jobs, that was like super stressful for them. It does, make sometimes those symptoms that seem like they're coming from a musculoskeletal sort of origin, it does alleviate those sometimes.
Yeah.
So, finally, I want to ask you one last question here. So, for someone who's never seen a chiropractor and may feel a little hesitant, how would you describe what they can expect from holistic chiropractic experience, and how does it differ maybe from the traditional image that people often have of chiropractic care?
Sure. I tell people that you should feel significantly better almost immediately when you go to see a professional, legitimate chiropractor. That's my conviction. Now, every case is different. And again, if you have, terrible sciatica going down the back of your leg into your toes, then yeah, it might take a few adjustments for you to really feel, significant change. However, I often hear patients lament about experiences they've had at other offices. And unfortunately, the profession, I'm kind of getting on a soapbox here, the profession has gravitated towards more of a high volume and insurance based model, which results in astonishingly poor quality of care. And so, what I tell people, Luba, is that when done properly, the chiropractic adjustment is the best thing ever. And when done carelessly, the adjustment is like the worst thing ever. Sometimes I use dentistry as an analogy. Like if you find a good dentist who takes good care of your teeth, probably not going to hurt that much. But if you are working with a dentist who's just trying to get you in, get you out, work really quickly and sloppily and carelessly, then your mouth's probably going to hurt and you're probably going to have messed up teeth, especially if they're not really being intentional and focusing on what they're doing. So that's one of the reasons why I have my own private office, is because I'm so convicted that if you deliver and render the chiropractic adjustment well, then you're going to get tremendous results for people, and they're going to feel better. And I never want to be swayed by what the insurance company telling me what my patient would need. I just want to work directly with the patient and make sure that they get what they need on a personal level.
Right. Yeah. And I agree 100%. I feel like at this point, and maybe we can revisit it if there's some changes made at some point. But at this point, I think the insurance model incentivizes, uh, sort of quantity over quality of care.
Right.
And so, unfortunately, it does tie our hands sometimes in order to not only provide care but also sustain a business and all that. So, I think there's a lot of people who are aware of that, a lot of practitioners, and a lot of patients who understand that and choose to go out of network. But that's definitely a big discussion we can have. We can have a whole other podcast or seven about. So thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful. This was amazing information, and the practical tips I think they're going to help so many people. So thank you for being here, and we'll do it again soon.
My pleasure, Luba. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you so much to Dr. Kyle Wallner for joining me and sharing his insight on how chiropractic care connects to gut health, the vagus nerve, and overall wellness. I hope today's conversation inspires everyone listening to think beyond symptom relief and start exploring how nervous system health impacts every part of the body, from digestion to mood and energy. And as always, thank you for tuning in to Sage Connections. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave a review. It helps us grow this community and reach more people with these important conversations. As always, take care of your health and your wellness.